Some people fish for fish, others fish for thoughts. Today I was thinking about something. There is a phase of life where we believe with great ease, not in the sense of naivety, but of intensity. Things, they seem more definitive, clearer, more organized. There is a very strong sense of direction, as if the future, it were somehow drawn out there in front, just waiting for us to reach it. We look at our own life and have the impression that we understand what is happening. We understand who we are, and we understand where we are going. And perhaps one of the most common certainties is this idea that there is a specific moment when everything will click into place, as if there were a point in time, a place where finally doubts diminish, choices make sense, and life takes on a more stable form. We project this onto very concrete things. When school ends, when starting to work, when making money, when living alone, when reaching some ideal version of oneself. Only, what happens? There is always this when. And along with it, a silent certainty that when this moment arrives, something inside us will resolve itself. But time passes, and the curious thing is that this moment, it always seems to shift. That which before was seen as the arrival point begins to appear more like a stage. The place where you thought you would find stability reveals new doubts. What before was certainty slowly goes losing strength, and not in a sudden way. It is almost imperceptible. And perhaps the strangest thing is not the fact that certainty it can disappear, but the fact that while it existed, it seemed absolutely true. It did not seem like a possibility, it did not seem like a hypothesis, it seemed evident, as if there were no other way for things to be. And it is only later, with some distance, that you perceive that that was not exactly a truth about the world, but a specific way of seeing that moment of your life. A reading built from who you were in that phase, from the references you had, from the expectations you carried. The certainty was not in the world, it was in you. And this completely changes the way we look at our own history, because it means that many of the things you already had absolute conviction in, they were not definitive, they were provisional, even appearing solid, they were real in that moment, within that version of you, but they did not resist time. And this is not necessarily something negative. Perhaps it is part of this natural movement of existing. That growing up is not just accumulating certainties, it is also perceiving that some of them do not hold up. It is looking back and recognizing that what seemed obvious today no longer makes so much sense. Understanding that this is not an error, but rather a shift, a fine-tuning of who you were and what you are becoming. And perhaps if we look with a little more calmness, there is something beautiful in all of this, because it means that life, it is not trapped in certainties that we build at the beginning of it, that there is space for change, for revision, for new ways of understanding the world. That what today seems definitive can also at some moment be transformed. And this does not diminish the value of what you believed. It only reveals that certainty. It was never something fixed. It was always in motion, accompanying you, changing with you, and perhaps without you noticing, preparing you to doubt better. And if there is a type of certainty that does not pass through logic, it is that which is born from feeling. Because some things we do not decide to believe, we simply feel. This already seems to be enough. There is a very specific moment when this happens. It is a moment when someone enters your life, or a relationship is built, a bond deepens, and without much effort, you begin to believe that that is different. Not in the sense of being special only, but in the sense of being permanent, as if there were something there that could not be broken. And this sensation, it does not need an argument. It does not depend on explanation. It sustains itself because it comes accompanied by an intensity that convinces you. You feel that that is true, and perhaps really in fact it is true, but the feeling, it already occupies the place of any proof you might need. Perhaps that is why these certainties are so strong, the emotional certainties, because they are not thought, they are lived. While they are happening, it is difficult to imagine a scenario where they cease to exist. It does not seem possible that all of that would change, that that would dissolve, that that would lose form. There is a kind of implicit continuity, okay? As if time this time, it were in your favor. But what happens is that time, it does not make deals. And slowly some of these certainties, they begin to transform. Not necessarily in an abrupt way, but sometimes it is very subtle. It is a change of rhythm. It is a distance that grows without much fanfare. It is a feeling that it is no longer as intense as before. And that which seemed unshakable begins to reveal small cracks, until at some moment you perceive it is not like before. And perhaps the most difficult thing is not the end itself, but the contrast between what you were certain it was and what it became. Because the memory of the intensity continues existing. The sensation of truth that you experienced was real. That was not an illusion in the sense of not having happened. It was a legitimate experience lived with depth, but it did not remain. And this reveals something important, that there are certainties that are not made to last. They are not false. Perhaps they are only temporary, and perhaps the error is not in feeling with so much conviction, but rather in believing that everything that is intense needs to be eternal, as if the strength of a feeling were sufficient to guarantee its permanence. But not everything that is true in one moment continues being in the next. I make a point of repeating this. There are things that continue being, but not everything that is true in one moment continues being in the next. And this does not invalidate what you lived. It only shows that the truth of an experience, it is not necessarily in its duration, but rather in the way it happened while it existed. And perhaps some emotional certainties, they do not exist to remain. They exist only to mark, to cross through you, to transform you, and then leave a space. And when we understand this, something changes in the way we look at these experiences. Because the question, it stops being how something that seemed so certain ended and starts being what this did with me while it existed. And perhaps it is there that these certainties reveal what they really are, not promises of permanence, but moments of truth intense enough to change us, even if they do not stay. And the funny thing is that not all certainties you carry, they started with you. Some of them were already there, even before you had the chance to question anything. They were in the way you were raised, in the conversations you heard without noticing, in the values that were repeated inside the house, in the ideas that seemed so obvious they would never need to be explained. They did not arrive as doubts, they arrived as truth. Can you understand that? And perhaps that is why they installed themselves with such ease, because when something is presented too early, it finds no resistance. It does not need to prove itself, it just fits, organizes itself inside you, and starts to be part of the way you understand the world. What is right? What is wrong? What is success? What is failure? What is worthwhile and what should be avoided? All this at some moment seemed definitive, but not because you chose, because you absorbed, and for a long time, this is not perceived by us. We grow up believing that our certainties are ours, that what we think was built from conscious choices. There is a sense of authorship, as if each conviction carried a personal decision behind it, you know? But slowly some things, they begin to shift. Sometimes it is one, it can be an encounter, sometimes it is an experience out of the ordinary, and sometimes it is simply time passing. And that which seemed so natural begins to feel strange. An idea that before seemed indisputable begins to generate a discomfort in you. A value that was always treated as a rule begins to seem a little relative. A worldview that you never questioned starts to no longer fit so well. And this moment, it is silent. It does not happen all at once, but when it happens, it opens a rift. Because suddenly you perceive that that which seemed like a certainty perhaps was never a choice. And this can become very uncomfortable, because questioning an inherited certainty is not just changing opinion, it is touching something deeper. It is reviewing a part of the structure that sustained the way you oriented yourself in the world up until then. And for an instant, it can seem that everything loses its firmness a bit. But there is something important in this movement, because for the first time, you begin to participate in the construction of your own certainties. It is no longer something repeating itself, but it is you choosing. And this does not mean abandoning everything that came before by any means, because some things, they remain, some make sense, even after being questioned. But now, there is a space between you and that which you believe. And in this space, there is consciousness. Perhaps this is one of the most important moments of life. When you stop carrying certainties as an inheritance and begin, even if slowly, to assume that which makes sense to you, not as something definitive, but as something alive. Because in the world and deep down, perhaps the deepest certainties are not those that we receive ready-made, but those that we have the courage to revisit and, if necessary, let go. There is a curious thing that happens in the day-to-day and almost no one perceives. You are in a simple conversation. It could be about anything, a movie, a soccer team, any opinion. At some point, someone disagrees with you. It is nothing serious, but something changes. Your body, it changes a little. Your attention changes. And even before thinking much, you are already trying to organize arguments. Not necessarily because that is important, but because in some way you want to sustain what you said. I want to be right. I seek a certainty. And this happens all the time, in small things, almost irrelevant, in details that change nothing in your life. Even so, there exists a subtle necessity to maintain one's own position, as if letting go of a certainty were in some way letting go of oneself. But perhaps the interesting question is not who is right. Perhaps it is why it matters so much. Now try to notice one thing. In the next conversation you have anyone, pay attention at the exact moment someone disagrees with you. You do not need to change anything. You do not need to try to be different, just observe. Notice the urge to respond, the urge to explain better, to adjust the argument, to convince. Notice how this comes fast. It is almost automatic. And now, make a small detour. For a few moments, do not respond, do not agree, do not disagree, do not try to win the point. Just listen, but listen for real, without preparing the answer while the other talks. What happens there is strange, because for an instant you step out of that place of defense. You do not need to sustain anything, you do not need to prove anything, do not need to protect any idea. And this creates a different space, a space where you begin to perceive that many times certainty, it is not there to help you understand better, but rather to protect you. Protect from what? Perhaps protect an identity of yours, perhaps the feeling of coherence, perhaps the need to feel secure within your own ideas. And this completely changes the way of looking at certainty, because it stops being just a conviction about the world and begins to appear also as a mechanism, a way for you to position yourself, to sustain, and perhaps in many moments we are not defending an idea because it is true, but because it is ours. And when you perceive this in the middle of a simple conversation, something changes. And it does not change in a radical way, but subtle. You begin to relax a little, to listen more, to perceive that not every disagreement needs to turn into a dispute, and that not every opinion, it needs to be defended until the end. And perhaps for the first time, certainty stops being an obligation and it becomes just a possibility. And now, I ask you a question. What if you did not have so much certainty? Because there is one thing that we almost never experience for real, the possibility of not having certainty. Not as anxious doubt, not as confusion, but as a different state of being in the world. Because normally we live leaning on something, on ideas, definitions, narratives that organize experience. Who I am, what I want, what makes sense, what does not make sense. And even when we do not perceive it, there is a structure there sustaining the way we interpret our own life. And this gives stability, gives a sense of continuity, but it can also limit you, because when you have a certainty about something, you stop looking at that with curiosity. You stop investigating. You stop perceiving the nuances. That becomes too well known and therefore invisible. Perhaps that is why childhood it is so intense, not because everything was better, but because almost nothing was completely known. Things, they had a kind of openness, a certain mystery, a space where experience had not yet been completely defined. And with time, we go filling this space. We go naming everything, organizing everything, go creating enough certainties to manage to live with less effort. But in the middle of this, something is lost. There is a silent exercise that you can do now. You do not need to close your eyes, do not need to change anything, just look around you. But this time, try to make a small detour. Look as if you did not know exactly what you are seeing, not in the literal sense, but in the sense of suspending for an instant that automatic layer that already identifies everything. The wall stops being just a wall. The light, it stops being just the light. Objects, they stop being that which you already know they are. And for a few seconds, everything gains a slight strangeness, not because it changed, but because you stepped out of certainty. And this is subtle, but deep, because it shows that the way you see the world, it is not fixed. It depends on the way you position yourself before it. When you are full of certainties, everything seems defined. When you relax that a little, things begin to open up. And this also makes up part of an exercise of understanding about the look of the other. Because from the moment that you have a certain strangeness about a determined object, you manage to understand that another person armed with other certainties can have another understanding about the same object. And perhaps the most honest question is not what is right, but what happens when I do not need to have so much certainty like that. Because when certainty diminishes, something unexpected happens. It is not a void, it is a space. It is different. A space where you begin to perceive things that before went unnoticed, small details, subtle changes, nuances in people, in conversations, even in yourself. You begin to listen in another way, to observe with more presence and feel without the necessity to frame everything immediately. And this does not leave you lost. This leaves you more available. Perhaps we have learned throughout life that not knowing is a problem, but what if it is not? And what if not knowing is just another type of relationship with the world, something less rigid, less rushed, a little more open, because deep down life, it does not happen inside certainties. It happens while things are still forming, while you still do not have all the answers, while you are with something in motion in your life. And perhaps that is why so many certainties, they can change, not because they were wrong, but because life continued. And when you perceive this, something shifts place inside you. You do not need to abandon everything you believe in, but also do not need to hold on with everything with so much strength. You can sustain ideas, but without trapping yourself completely to them. You can feel without needing to transform everything into definition. You can live without needing to understand everything the whole time. Perhaps the closest to a real form of stability is this, not that which comes from absolute certainty, but that which comes from the capacity to continue even without it, even without this certainty. Because in the end, perhaps the question was never, "Are you sure?" but rather what happens when you do not need to be. If this flow of thought, it made sense to you, I invite you to comment here, leave your comment, including your opinion on the subject. And if you have already had one, two, or many certainties transformed throughout life, I also invite you, in case it is of your interest, to subscribe to the channel.